Hello chess fans, I'm Risko, one of the instructors at the St. Louis Chess Club, and I'm here for Chess Openings Explained. Tonight's opening is going to be the Tartakower Defense, which is in the Queen's Gambit declined. Now, we've been looking over a lot of e4 openings since I've taken over the class. Figured it's time to switch it up, start to get into more of the positional side of things, rather than openings that are based on a lot of attacks and tactics. So let's get right into it. The Tartakower, like I said, starts in the Queen's Gambit declined, so the first move we have is d4, and black will play d5, just making sure they have a share in the center as well as white. Now here, white will play pawn to c4, and this is known as the Queen's Gambit, a very popular chess opening. And the idea is that if black takes this pawn, one way white may continue is just play e4 right away, and they're already going to have pressure and normally will win the pawn back rather quickly. Now, this does give white a lot of space and a lot of room to move around if black takes, so a lot of the time you'll see black not take this pawn and play e6, and this is known as the Queen's Gambit declined. There are other moves here, such as pawn to c6, which leads itself to a Slav, or, yeah, like I said, just taking, or even knight to c6, the Chigorin. So tonight we'll look at e6, and the most popular way for white to continue is with knight to c3. And the idea of knight to c3 is just putting more pressure on the center, and you're also putting some support on the e4 square, just in case white is able to get through and play e4 right away. Now, black does have things to limit this plan, mainly with knight f6. Knight f6 just puts more control on e4, so you can't just play pawn to e4 as white, and the knight also puts more defense on d5. Now, to get into the Tartakower, white needs to play bishop to g5, and this is the most common move in this position, just pinning the knight to the queen, and this in turn is also removing some of the defense from d5. So capturing in the center will force black to recapture with their pawn, which we'll see can affect the structures in different ways later. Now, to maintain the defense on d5, we get black playing bishop to e7, and this is breaking the pin, it's developing a piece, getting black ready to castle. All good so far. Now, white can play knight to f3, and black can follow with h6. Now, I do want to make a note that this move order is not the only order of moves that can be played to get to this position. You can see knight f3 being played before knight c3. You can get bishop g5 coming later. You can see e3 played before knight f3. You can even see black castle before playing h6. So this is not the only move order, but a lot of move orders will lead to this same position. I'm only bringing this specific move order up, though, because before black castles and black plays h6, the main move is bishop to h4, but there's also the anti-Tartakower, which is bishop takes f6. And the idea is that after black takes back with the bishop, you can play pawn to e3, supporting the center, opening up a line for your bishop. You get black castles, rook to c1, putting the rook on a file which is going to open rather quickly, either with white taking or black taking. Black plays c6 to defend, and here black gets sort of this semi-Slav type structure here. You have these pawns making a triangle, and your light square bishop is trapped behind the pawn. So if black is not familiar with the ideas in the semi-Slav, this could be a little rough for them. So this is just some sideline they need to watch out for. Some common moves to develop here would be bishop to d3, knight to d7, castles, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and black can get away with an e5 break. Here the pawn is sufficiently defended and shouldn't be too big of a deal if white takes. They can just recapture with knight. White will play h3, he takes d4, he takes d4, and white gets this isolated pawn. And we'll get a couple different looks here at the hanging pawns structure and the Isolani pawn structure. And this here is an Isolani pawn structure where there's this isolated queen's pawn, and what white will normally try to do is develop their pieces actively and time a d5 push. Knight to b6 is a way to continue, open up the diagonal for your bishop while putting pressure on white. So you drop the bishop back to save it, bishop f5, bring the rooks to the e file, trade the rooks, queen d2, queen d7, and rook e1 leads to an equal position. So this is the anti-Tartakower. This is just something that black should be aware of if they are going with this move order. However, like I said, it does lead to a very even position, and white can be a little bit more ambitious if they leave the minor pieces on the board. If they go bishop h4, they retain the bishop pair, and they'll retain some chances later on to build up pressure. So bishop h4 and castles. And now after e3, we see black play pawn to b6. And this is our starting position for the Tartakower defense here after b6. The idea is that this light square bishop is not having a great time on this diagonal from c8 to h3 because of this pawn on e6. So to get this light square bishop in the game, black plays b6, and in almost every line is going to go bishop b7 on the next move. So what are white's options? What kind of plans can they go with after b6? There's actually 5 pretty decent moves that white can choose from here. And I'm trying to see which one would be the best one to show off first. I think we can go with one of the older lines, queen to b3. So as far as I know, this one is probably the least popular of the moves we're going to cover. However, this is probably one of the better scoring options for white, and I think it's well worth looking at, giving it some attention. So after queen b3, you are putting more pressure on the center, and black goes bishop to b7, reinforcing, developing the bishop. Pretty straightforward. Now we'll see white take on f6, and I guess I want to ask, why do we see the bishop take on f6? Does anybody have any good ideas why white would be okay giving up the bishop pair? Sandro Schock, nice to see you again. Why does white give up the bishop pair? All right, we have one guess in the chat. Remove a defender of e4 so white can push e4. We have another guess to reduce the number of defenders on d5. And was it Ragnarok 56 actually hits it right away. It says black has to recapture on d5 with a pawn. This is pretty important that we force the recapture on d5 with a pawn. Not to close the position. I'm getting more guesses in the chat here, but it's not so you can close the position. If you end up playing c5, okay, black can't take, but I mean, you're not really threatening b6. The a pawn can just take back. But the point is that we want to try and force black to have a less than ideal pawn structure. And once this knight is off of f6, we can almost force black to have a hanging pawns structure. We can take on d5 right away, and the pawn should take. If you take with the bishop, then knight takes is not going to be, I guess it shouldn't be a problem for black, but it's not ideal. You kind of want to keep that bishop on the board because white's pawns on the dark squares are doing an okay job at stopping the dark square bishop. And you have some holes in your camp on the queen side. Not saying that this is, losing. There's some things to be aware of. Now moves like Rook C1 hitting C7 is a nice way to add pressure. Bishop to D3 just gets the bishop in the game. Castles is easy. But with black, it's a little hard to see how you're going to expand on the queen side. If you go C6 and you move your knight, well, C6 is a backwards pawn, and you're going to attack that. If you try and go C5 right away, sorry, I guess it's white's move. But if you try and go c5 right away, then white can capture and force the hanging pawns structure. So okay, we take right away, the e-pawn takes, and now we get rook to d1. Why rook to d1? This looks a little awkward. You would almost assume the rook should go to c1. But here, honestly, it's kind of a bit of a mystery move. But once we see the rook go to e8 and bishop to d3, part of it is kind of to support the bishop, make sure it's not hanging. Also, after c5, if they play c5, which black should here, then white takes with the pawn, and now after black recaptures, well, okay, sorry, they can't recapture. Yeah, this is one tactic that black needs to worry about, is the bishop hanging. So knight d7 here, sorry. But now the rook is on an open file here on d1 instead of on c1. But okay, like I said, we have to go knight d7 here because you can't take back right away. After knight d7, there's a couple tricks here that both sides need to be aware of. It almost looks like white can get away with just winning a pawn. What happens if they take? Well, if they take here, this is actually a little blunder because it allows knight c5, and normally allowing knight c5 is not an issue because you can just go queen c2, and then after the knight takes the bishop, you take back with the queen. But here, queen takes b6, and you have quite a bit of pressure on the queen side, and you can't just castle. You'd really like to castle, but the problem here is bishop to a6, and now you're being skewered. Your queen has to move out of the way, and you're losing an exchange. So this just unfortunately doesn't work out for white just because you don't get that development in time. So trying to win the pawn is a big mistake. Instead, you're going to lose this pawn. You might as well try and ruin black's position with it while you can. You play c6, and now the bishop has to take. We can also look at knight to c5 because it is attacking the queen, but this is another trap in the position that black can fall for. So I will leave it here, see if any of you guys can spot the tactic. Knight c5 attacking the queen, forking queen and bishop. We just looked at this and this was good for black in a similar line, but why does it blunder here? It is not, so after queen c2 and they capture, you can just recapture, because then the bishop can capture on c6 and there's not much pressure. It's a little bit sharper. And you have to be okay with material imbalances. Queen takes. Oh, I guess you're looking at queen takes d5. Queen takes d5. This move doesn't work because bishop takes c3 with check. You have to resolve the check, and once you take, you've lost your defender of the queen. So it's not queen takes pawn. And that's just from not being able to castle. I guess just white hasn't castled yet. So queen takes pawn does not work. We do have someone in the chat who has the correct answer. Pawn takes b7. But Nick, what are you doing? Your queen is hanging. Well, black takes the queen, and now you take on a8 and make your own queen. And now after they take your queen on a8, you take the knight on b3. And if you take a look at the position, you have 3 minor pieces, which mathematically, 3 minor pieces worth 3 points each will add up to 9. And then each side has a rook. And now we see that there is a rook for a bishop. So you're up 2 points of material as far as pieces go. And as far as pawns go, both of you guys have 6 pawns. So white is up material here. And according to Stockfish 13, is at least +2. So you do have to be good with material imbalances, understand how to use the pieces to overpower the queen, but here white just has too much material. So you can't go knight c5 here. This is why you must take on c6 with the bishop. And now after the bishop takes, now white finally gets to castle, try and finish up some of the development here. Now knight c5 here, you can just go queen to c2, and rook to c8, kind of lining up the rook with the queen. Now with all of these pieces in the way, is nothing you really need to worry about just yet. If black tries to take the bishop, white can recapture with the queen, and white is slightly better because of the pressure on this isolated pawn. So that's why we see rook to c8. After rook to c8, you can get knight to d4, and then after bishop d4, pawn takes. This is a equal position. Black can take the bishop if they want, or they can probably move back, but in my opinion, they should just take the bishop. And after queen takes, this is equal position. There's at least 5 moves here black can play that are equal, so I guess this is where the game starts. So that is what can happen after queen to b3. Some pretty straightforward play. Now someone's asking what happens if black pushes d5 to d4 before white castles. Well, at what point can they actually play d4? Right, you capture on c5, they have to get their material back somehow, and knight d7 is the only way to do so. And then you play c6, which is forking some pieces. You have to take, and then white castles. So black actually doesn't get the chance to play d5 to d4 before white castles. Okay, so instead of queen to b3, let's take a look at some more, I guess, modern or more popular approaches to this position. Another line you can play, which also isn't as popular, is c takes d5. Someone's asking knight d7 instead of d4 in the previous line. Aren't you just hanging material? Instead of knight d7, they go d4. Well, first you can just go bishop c4. You add another attacker. Yes, your knight is hanging, but this is hanging with check. So if something... Okay, they can't even take because they hang the queen. Like, black's position is just starting to fall apart here. You're getting too loose in the center. You're falling behind in development on the queen side. f7 is weak. I don't know what else you want me to say. You're not winning your pawn back anymore. Black really needs to play knight d7 to maintain equality. So they go d4 instead, just bishop c4, attack f7, you get another piece attacking the pawn. Alright, hopefully we can all agree that playing d4 as black is not good. On to the next choice for white is taking on d5 after black plays b6. So you take on d5, and this forces black to make a decision. Either way, they're going to have to take on d5 with a pawn, but are they going to do it now, or are they going to do it later? As in, like, 1 or 2 moves later. Because you can also take with the knight. And this is the most popular way black plays, is just takes with the knight. And what this does is makes a threat on the bishop on h4. They're threatening to win. So you have to resolve this threat first. Take on e7. Now knight takes c3. Maybe kind of a Potzer's trying to say, aha, I got an extra move with my knight, I'm attacking your queen, but this is just losing. You trade queens, and after knight takes d1, there is bishop e7 with a tempo on the rook, and if rook to e8, you can retreat the bishop, and this knight is trapped. There's nowhere this knight can go. Black is going to be losing a piece. So watch out for that one. You just take on e7, and this forces them to recapture with the queen. If the knight takes, I mean, this is fine, but you're undeveloping your knight, and now after bishop to d3, white is a bit ahead in development here. They have a little bit of space. They're ready to castle. It would make a lot more sense for the queen to capture and then bring your rook over to d8. So you see queen takes, and now knight takes d5, pawn takes d5. All right, after these moves, white can play rook to c1, putting pressure on c7. And now, oddly enough, instead of playing bishop to b7, we get bishop to e6. And this is just controlling the center. Maybe you're going to try and go c5 in the future, but go bishop e6. This is the most popular move on the master level. And queen to a4. I guess we should ask what happens if bishop b7, and this isn't necessarily bad, but white can just continue with bishop d3. I guess you could play c5, and after takes with the pawn, white castles, there's no issues. This is also an equal position, but I think I believe black has scored better with bishop e6. At least it's been played, 900 more times. So we're just going to go with bishop e6 and queen a4, putting some pressure on the position. You get pawn c5, and rather than just take and give black the hanging pawns right now, white has this move queen to a3, and this puts pressure on c5. They cannot just take on d4 because the queen would hang on e7. So this does pin it. Black should play rook to c8, give it a little bit more defense. And now white can just finish their development with bishop to e2. After the queen goes to f8, breaking this pin, now we capture on c5, pawn captures, and white can castle. And this too is also a fairly equal position. Black would probably benefit most from developing the knight to d7 and adding more defense. So this is one of the ways you can go with c takes d5. And this is a rather forcing approach. It's pretty straightforward as well. You just need to know that if the knight takes, you have to take on e7 and resolve this threat first, and then pin on c5 later, and then finish your development. Okay, so that was c takes d5. What other moves are there here? Rook to c1 is a pretty good move. This was played by, was it Short? I believe it was Short who played this. But after rook to c1, black normally continues bishop to b7. And now we take on f6 with the same idea as before, is that you're removing a defender of d5, so that way when you take, they have to take with the pawn. And again, you don't really want to take with the bishop, mainly because of knight takes, and okay, queen takes is fine, but bishop c4 is already going to come with tempo. And once the queen goes back, just castles, and white is just miles ahead in development here. But you take, pawn takes, and b4. This is another idea you will get in the Tartakower from white is if they're not fighting in the center to give the hanging pawns, they can also go b4, and this prevents c5. So black goes c6 instead, and now you get bishop d3, queen d6, and queen b3. So you can also see this queenside play. And one of the ways this may develop is knight to d7, castles, a5, a3 defending, we see a trade, and bishop to e7 attacking the pawn, and white is going to do fine after rook to b1. After rook b1, rook f e8, this position is just so slightly better for white after rook f to e1, but very, very slightly. So that is one way you can continue with rook to c1. Rook to c1 is going to focus more on this b4 play with queenside development. Okay, there are two other moves in this position that deserve attention. And let's check the Masters database real quick to see which one is played more often. So the other two moves you have is bishop to d3, and you also have bishop to e2. Now, what are the differences between these bishop moves? You're developing the same piece, but to different squares. Why would one person want to go an extra square? Well, I guess we'll look at bishop e2 first, because it's not as popular. But one of the ideas you have is that if they take on c4, it doesn't come with tempo on the bishop. So white does have an extra move to just kind of castle if they want, and take back later, although most popular is just taking back right away. Got a question in the chat: are kingside attacks effective in these lines? It's hard to say. I haven't seen any kingside attacks work early on, mainly because both sides are fighting in the center. And here in d4, with d4 openings, you're going to be less likely to find these big grand attacks just coming right away, where you're throwing your pawns up the board on the king side trying to checkmate. Just because with d4 you're not opening as many lines for your pieces as early. So I wouldn't recommend trying to go for those attacks. With d4 openings, it seems most of the plans is just take it slow, play positionally, build up a small advantage, build on that. I'm not going to say that d4 is all that, because there are some sharp openings like the Grunfeld, but for the most part, and especially here, it's going to be a bit more of a classical approach to the position. Okay, so we're going to take a look at bishop to e2. Black continues with bishop to b7, and again we get a capture on f6. Bishop captures, c takes d5, e takes d5. By now we're starting to notice that these are standard moves in the position. And here with bishop to e2, we can also see this b4 expansion. And after b4, black has two moves here. One is c6, which is like what we just looked at with the Rook C1 lines. But there's also the opportunity for them to play c5. And part of this is because white's rook is now on c1, adding extra pressure. And if c5 is played and white takes, black takes back, and white can go rook to b1 here. White is not going to be looking to take back on c5 because of bishop c3 check, and you're losing a massive amount of material. You can resign after taking. So you have to let this sit. But you go rook b1. Part of this is so that way if you do capture, there's no pin. But this doesn't protect the knight, so you still can't capture. And now we see bishop to c6, just defending the bishop, moving it out of harm's way. Moving on from here, white is going to castle, finish up some development. Black will continue developing with knight d7. And now white is going to trade off the light square bishops with bishop to b5 and queen c7, just defending the bishop. You can take, this is fine, this will lead to an equal game. And this is what you can look forward to if you play bishop to e2. Now that's with c5, which again is kind of an exception because the rook is not on c1. But the main move is c6. After c6, white castles, and we get rook to e8. After rook to e8, we now see queen b3, which is following those ideas of expanding on the queen side. And black will try and hit white with a5. Now, in the other line, we saw white play pawn to a3, and this is still playable. But black can just move the knight, develop, and unless white is capturing, can't really take advantage of this backwards b pawn. If you do take, they're just going to take with the rook. So with a5, rather than play a3, you just take right away. And then after rook takes, you can go a4. This is kind of limiting the space that the rook has to operate on, stopping any type of rook to b5. Even though there are pieces controlling this square already, you're just limiting the rook, gaining some space on the queen side. And now we see knight d7, putting control on b6. I guess you can probably also try rook to b1 here as well. And you're met by knight d7 because it's the only move that protects this pawn. And this is another line you can go down. But I like a4, just getting this space back. Knight d7 again, and now rook f2 e1. So you're getting this rook off of f1 in case you need to drop the bishop back for any reason here. And if they play c5, maybe you can allow them to take, and you take back, and it's on an open file. But it's another one of those kind of mysterious rook moves. We get queen to a8, bishop to d3, which is kind of controlling the back rank over here. The rook is ready to help e4 maybe get played in the future. And now black has enough protection on c5 from the knight, the rook, and the pawn that they can play c5 right away. After c5, you can go bishop b5, pin the knight to the rook, and the logical move is rook d8, just protect it and break the pin. Now takes, and queen takes b6. So white looks to be going up a pawn in this line. After bishop to c6, your queen is starting to run low on squares. You can't go rook b7, that would hang the bishop, but rook a6 might look a little scary. And here, rook a2 b1. Maybe you can try and trade the queens. But black is building up a lot of pressure on this a pawn, looking to win this for the b pawn that they gave up. And yeah, I think you're just going to lose this pawn anyway, so bring your rook to the open file. And king h7 has been played here before. And this was played in 2018. There's a game here played in 2018. It was a draw between Rain and Diaz. So that's probably all the engine prep there for queen e2. That game did follow almost all engine prep. And then I guess the last move here, bishop to d3. And this is what you'll see most people play in the Tartakower. This is the main line. All the other moves were sidelines except for bishop e2. Bishop e2 is a bit more of a serious try. But bishop d3 is the most popular next to bishop e2. Okay, bishop d3. I'm going to scroll down in my notes here. And you guessed it, black plays bishop to b7. Now, I did mention some people might play bishop e2 to avoid this capture coming with tempo. So let's take a look at what happens if black takes. If black takes, this is no problem for white. White can just take back with their bishop. And now we get bishop to b7 and castles. If they ever capture on f3, currently your queen can recapture, no big deal. Knight to d7, queen to e2. Again, making sure the queen can recapture the knight, and also connecting your rooks, so your rooks can go to d1 and c1. And now we get this move that reminds me of the Queen's Indian, knight to e4, looking to maybe trade the knights off the board. And here you can either take the knight or take on e7. One of the moves that I have, just to show an example, is bishop to g3, because this is a move you'll see in other lines as well. Just retreating the bishop can be a bit better of a move than trading pieces off the board. And if they do take on g3, you just take back with your h-pawn. Your structure is still very sound. Pawn to c5. And rather than take the pawn, if you do take with the pawn, black is going to be happy to take with either the bishop or the knight. Both of these will improve the minor pieces. Taking with knights is probably better, because if the bishop is on c5, it's pointing at these pawns, and it's not going to have the range you want it to. But taking with the knight should be fine for black. So rather than take and allow black to develop, you can go rook f to d1. And here, for some reason, the most played move is bishop takes f3. And I'm not the biggest fan of this move, and the engine isn't either, but this is the most played move in the Masters database. If you take with the queen, then it's pretty equal. But if you take with the pawn, white has a pretty substantial advantage here of almost +1, and it's after takes on d4, e takes on d4. You still have this shelter around your king. You can go king g2, maybe rook to h1 might be an idea. Try and focus on the h file. But this seems to have no problems for white at all. Knight to f6, and now you can play d5. If e takes, knight takes. Oh, not the bishop. Knight takes. And after knight takes, it's hard to find a fantastic move for black, because if you take, bishop takes d5, this is actually a fork. For those of you who don't see it, well, first, you're hitting the rook. That's pretty obvious. But the second part is bishop takes f7 with check. And it's key that this comes with check because it is also a discovery on the queen. So this is a fork threatening the rook and threatening bishop f7 check with a discovery on the queen. So you can't take on d5 with the knight. You can improve slowly with bishop c5, but we can get some queenside expansion from white here, b4 right away, defended by the knight. And here white just has the space, the king is safe, the queen and rook are doing a good job on the open files, and black is still struggling to find the best place for their queen and queenside rook. So here, this line I don't think works out for black just quite, but that is just after bishop takes f3. Rather than take on f3 with the bishop, black should probably just keep the pieces on the board. You can go knight f6, and if white takes, then queen to c7, and okay, it looks like you can try to take right away and give up this, sorry, not give up the bishop, it is defended. White just gets this pawn over here. In return, black does have these pretty active pieces, so this is a pawn sacrifice black could go ahead with. It's a bit better than just taking on f3. So that's just if they take on c4. Now you know what to do. That being said, black doesn't normally take on c4 here. Instead, they just go bishop to b7, regular normal development. And white continues by castling. So this is one of those lines where white actually castles what seems early compared to what we've been looking at before. But white can castle here. Knight to d7 is the most played move. And now white should play queen to e2. I know when I went through a weird awkward phase where I played d4, and here I played rook c1, which is still fine, but in order to make sure your rooks are getting to the correct files, you don't know if it's c1 and d1 or d1 and e1. Queen e2 is just a very flexible move that allows either of those setups. And in addition to maintaining flexibility for your rook placement and having them connected, this also gives you some support of an e4 push if you can get through with it. Like if black is just playing very sloppily, getting e4 in should be good for white. So queen e2, and here they can play c5, or they can play knight to e4, and they do transpose into each other, but I'm going to explain the difference here. Is that okay, knight e4 is probably better. If they go c5, white has many moves here, and they actually, can capture in the center either on c5 or capturing on d5. Capturing on d5 is a little bit better. But because of these captures in the center, white can kind of mess up black's structure a little bit, and black needs to be prepared for any of these possible moves white can make. Rather than try and hope white plays the main line, knight e4 is a little bit more forcing. Knight e4, and you can go bishop to g3, and that's what I recommend. You can also take on e7, and this is definitely playable. Queen captures, takes on d5, takes on d5, and then rook f to d1, or rook I guess f to c1. You can probably go rook a to c1 as well. There's a lot of good moves here. But like I said, I think bishop to g3 is also fine. Knight takes, pawn takes, no problem here. Black would probably continue with knight to f6, and you can capture in the center like normal. You'll probably get knight captures. And the only difference here is that if you do capture on d5 a lot, this doesn't hurt black because they don't have to take with the pawn, and this is what black is looking for. Knight d5 is fine whenever white can't trade enough to force e takes d5. So this is fine. So rather than, I guess, allow that, black can also go c5 right away. So like I said, taking on g3 is okay. But they also have c5 right away. This is your main line here. And we get c takes d5, e takes d5, and now rook a to d1. Why doesn't black play d takes c4 to open his light square bishop? Let's see if we can find a good opportunity where black can play this. You do want to develop the knight. If you take right away, then again we can just take, and there's no big problems here. You play c5. You play c5, I can take. Bishop takes, and now queen e2. I'm going to get the open file. So you can open it up, but I think the center opens up in a way that's favorable for white, at least in this position. If you wait until after queen e2, again, just after bishop takes, you're doing fine. And you still have knight e4. But yeah, like I said, I don't think there's any real problem with it. It's just the center kind of opens up to benefit white. They're a little bit quicker at getting those rooks on that open file, and you don't want your queen to be tempoed by those rooks. You want to make sure that you can develop all of your pieces first in order to contest that file at the proper time. You don't want to open the center prematurely. So knight d7, queen to e2, and knight to e4, which leads into this main line a bit more forcingly. Or a bit more forceful. And now we get c5. After c5, like I said, takes on d5, takes on d5. I guess black, what if they try to take instead of moving the knight up? Yeah, we just looked at this. Yeah, just taking is no problem. They can still go knight e4, but you can just trade everything off. And then rook f to d1. This rook's going to come to c1. And white is done with development, and black's pieces are probably not placed on their best squares. It's probably an argument. I guess the only move black has that gives them a good attack here is just c5, but rook a c1. White is just ahead in development. If you're asking after knight to e4 and takes on g3. So it takes, and now they take. Again, there's no problem here. The queen is still on d8. So if there's any type of c5, I can take. Here, black's probably best to go c6. Is knight e4 played to prevent b3? No. Knight e4 is played to trade off a set of minors. Which can be good for black because they're down a little bit of space. Not too much. They still have very good control over here. But is not really played to prevent b3. I mean, I don't think white is ever trying to play b3. I think white's trying to be a little bit more ambitious and play b4 if possible. Not possible with the bishop on e7. But I don't think that this is what white is even trying to go for in the first place, because a lot of the times you'll see white just capture on d5 and open up the center for the rooks. I don't think you're trying to go b3, let black take, and white takes back with the pawn, because you'd much rather have the c and d file than the b file and either c, d, or e file. You want your rooks to be as close to the center as possible. We have another question. How do you ensure that you are covering the color complex of the fianchettoed bishop of the opponent? If you're trying to touch on color complexes, you should probably be taking lessons from a GM and probably have a rating over 2,000 at least. Color complex isn't even something that I'm trying to touch in this. there really isn't much to worry about from this bishop as long as your knight on f3 is protected by the queen. And right now there's not much to worry about because it's blocked by its own pawn. So as far as the grand scheme of things on the board, worrying about the color complex of this bishop is like the least of my concern. Trying to focus on the pawn structure and control in the center is going to be a bit more important. Okay, back into the main line. Hopefully we covered all the questions. We get c5 by black. Just fighting in the center. And c takes d5. E takes d5. Rook a to d1. And now here, black can take on g3, and white will just take back with the h-pawn. There is another alternative here with queen to c8, and this has been played before back in 2007 by Vasily Ivanchuk. So he goes queen c8, and the way that this game continued was rook goes to c1, and it's a little odd because we just put that rook on d1. What are we doing moving the rook again? Well, this is now lined up with the queen, so there is a little bit of risk if black opens up the center. They go rook f to d8, rook f to d1, and now you get the c and d files when before you were probably going to get the d and e files. So the files have shifted over one, which is probably a little good because this is where the files are going to open up. Knight d to f6 and knight e5, just getting the knight into the center. Queen e6 was played, bishop h4, trying to avoid this capture, maybe capture on f6, rook a to c8, and I'll just play through some of these moves so you can see how the game developed. But most of the pieces got traded off here, and the game ultimately ended in a draw, but they reached this position and played on. But queen c8, yeah, a lot of the pieces can trade off here and lead to an equal position. So I think if black's trying to keep chances, be a little bit more ambitious, take on g3 with the knight, and after h takes g3, I'm going to recommend queen c7 here, and this is where I guess a lot of the theory kind of dissipates. Not too many people have had games in this line where it continues from here, but now you should have a solid basis for how to play against the Tartakower defense and to play it as black. What white tries to do is get black into a hanging pawns structure where if you're a less experienced player, it can be a little bit weak. Those pawns can be a liability because they have to be defended by pieces, but an experienced player probably shouldn't see too many problems having the hanging pawns and be able to use them to push forward effectively. Yeah, so that's it. I think it's a little bit of a difficult opening for black if you don't know what you're doing, but as long as you have some preparation against all of white's lines, I don't think you have any real trouble. Definitely a very interesting, balanced opening. But I'll open up our last 5 to 10 minutes here for any more questions that come through. I know we had a lot of them come through during the lecture, but maybe that inspired some of you to have your own questions. Yeah, any questions? Taking them now. Ben, do you ever have any questions? No, Ben doesn't have any questions. Ben's a super strong chess player.
Pandemic has silenced me.
Ben's so strong, he doesn't need to watch the actual lecture. He just does a great job editing. All right, I'm trying to see if I missed any lines here. No, I think we covered it all. Just black doesn't take on c4 too early. Just focus on the development of their pieces. White tries to mess up black's pawn structure. Ben Simon or Ben Feingold? Neither of the Bens need my opening classes. No, I was talking about Ben Simon. F5 ever. Does black ever play f5? I haven't seen any line where they play f5, but let me go through and see if there's a line where that's even possible. go through the moves. I guess the first time you may consider f5 is here, because this is the first move where it's really possible, but I don't see what f5 is getting you, actually. Maybe you can argue you're getting space on the king side, but, I mean, if white's smart, they're not going to take on e4 and walk into this fork. I guess they can take on d5, and you want to take with the pawn. And now you have knight e5. So, Nick Weiss, you're saying a lot of moves, g5, g4, but what is this actually gaining you? g5, g4 isn't attacking anything. There's knight e5 here. This is a pretty strong move. You're trying to stop knight g6, so you almost have to take, and now bishop e5. And now your chance to get the bishop pair is gone. Yeah, I think with the bishop over here on b7, putting your pawns on the light squares like this is not going to help your bishop. So yeah, f5 here doesn't seem to work out. You don't have enough pieces in the game. Yeah, white takes, you take. Knight e5. What else can you try here? And you can't go knight f6 just because knight g6 is too strong. So I guess it's a good question, but it just doesn't work out with probably one or two pieces on the queen side that you'd rather have in the center or king side. Yeah, and once the pawn is off of e6, f5 probably doesn't make as much sense, just because of knight e5. If c takes d4, you take back with the knight. So where's black capturing on d4? Right here? Yeah, here you would take back with the knight. Knight takes d4 because your rook is already on the d file and you don't want to block it with the pawn. And you might look at moving your rook over to c1 and the other rook to d1. So yeah, if they take on d4, taking back with the knight is probably ideal. Great Wolf is saying the idea worked for white when playing to London. I'm assuming you're talking about the f5 lines. What's the difference between the Tartakower and the Queen's Indian? Good question. So with the Queen's Indian, white is going to have a bit of a different setup. So first, the move order is different. You get knight f6 first, and after c4, e6, you get knight f3, and then b6. And in the Queen's Indian, white usually plays g3 followed by bishop g2. So white's going to have a different pawn structure. They're going to go bishop g2, contest this diagonal, and give it a different flavor. So, good question. I know sometimes with the move orders, I believe they can transpose between one another, but I think they're more like cousins than being like the same, like brothers. But very good question. All right. Any more questions? We'll give it another probably 2 or 3 minutes and wrap it up here. So, last minute questions. Man, I am curious about this f5 move. I don't know, I just don't see how you're compensating for the space and control white gets. What's my FIDE rating? Am I planning to become a GM? I'm not FIDE rated yet, and I might be too old to try and become a GM. But National Master, if I die and I'm not a National Master, I'll be sad.
You'll be dead.
Well, yeah, I'll be dead. Why do I put the rook on d1 if I'm going to move it to c1 anyway? Yes, very good question, bless P. I did cover this a little bit, but the reason you put it on d1 is because you're looking to capture on c5 and give black a hanging pawn structure. So if you're looking to take on c5, a rook on d1 makes a lot of sense. And like there was a comment earlier, if they take on d4, you just take back with the knight. Your rook is well placed against their queen, and you already have some pressure on the pawn. But yeah, if you go c1, this is also playable. Don't think this is a bad move. This is still fine. It's just if you take and they take back with the knight, you might have some problems trying to get the knight off of that file. No, there's no age limit to become a grandmaster. I just think I'm a little too old in the fact that I may not have the time to become a grandmaster. If I was like 12 and I only did school and the rest of my time I did chess, maybe there's some hope. But with me being a college student and working, there may just not be enough time for me to become a grandmaster. Why don't we move the other rook to d1? Again, this is also playable. They can take on g3, you take back. Looks like they can take, or not take, but play c4 and close up the position. Bishop c2 makes sense here. Why not the other rook? Why are they playing c4 in this line instead of in this line? You take, knight d2. What is the difference here? This is a good question. c4. Let's get to the bottom of this. Why? I don't think I can honestly give an answer for why one rook over the other. That's a very good question. That'll be your guys' homework assignment. Figure it out and you tell me in the comments section below. Yeah, I really wish I could give you an answer, but some of these rook moves on the back rank honestly are a little suspicious to me. The moves that I gave for my recommendations are ones that come from master games and what masters play the most. That's a pretty good comment, bless P there, saying that no matter how you arrange your rooks, whichever rook you move first, odds are that black can change the structure, or the structure is going to change where white is going to have to spend a tempo to adjust anyway. But I don't think that's a huge problem because white has probably better piece placement, in my opinion, that spending another move to adjust your rooks is not the end of the world. With rook A to d1, you have the option of bishop to b1. That's a pretty good point, that if you do go rook to d1 and they go c4, well, first you do want to take because the pawns are going to be too weak. But yeah, bishop to b1 is another option, and now your rook isn't going to be trapped in the corner. So that's a pretty good observation. Yeah, Great Wolf, I think that's a very nice point. But all right, we are hitting our time limit here, so unfortunately we won't be able to take any more questions, but you guys had a lot of great ones tonight. I will see you guys next week for Openings Explained. If there are any other questions that I didn't get into, make sure to drop them into the comments section below. We're going to head over to Twitch to wrap up the winner's circle. I'll see you guys over there. Have a good night.